Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.
Tonight, inflation has grown 6.2% this year, shattering any thoughts that this may only be temporary. And this was a week of splits. Johnson & Johnson is splitting into 2 companies, and General Electric is splitting into 3 companies. China, they're not a split. They're wanting to acquire Taiwan as their own. That and more tonight, all on Wall Street Wrap-Up. Hi, welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up. I hope your week went well. I'm Andre Laborde. Our goal is bringing Wall Street to your street for today, for Friday, November the 12th, 2021, and to get you ready for the week ahead. Well, this week's consumer numbers came out from the Labor Bureau, and with it, some good news and some bad. Well, the average income of Americans rose 4.9% last year. And if you're one of those lucky Americans that saw their paychecks rise by 4.9%, I'm sure you may be pleased. But on Wednesday, the Consumer Price Index came out that said that inflation for the last year had risen to 6.2%. That's the most since 1990 in 31 years. Well, if you are one of the lucky ones to see a 4.9% increase, you actually lost 1.3% because of the erosion of inflation. Everything from your gas bill to your breakfast is getting more expensive. Gas prices have risen almost 60% from last year. 1 year ago, we were energy efficient and for the first time in many years actually exporting oil. Today, we're asking OPEC to give us more oil, and OPEC is refusing. Well, coming up this evening, we'll be talking about China, and they're wanting to become a superpower over the United States. China's using U.S. businesses producing goods in their country with their labor. They also decide to censure what they want their people to see, whether it be from our movies to keeping the NBA in line. If China says jump, many of our Fortune 500 companies ask, how high would you like it? Tonight, we're going to be talking with Dr. Jonathan Ward, who wrote a great book on the subject of China called China's Vision of Victory. And we'll be talking to Jonathan in just a moment. But first, how did the markets do this week? Well, the S&P had its best day in 2 weeks. The Dow Jones Industrial Average ended the week at 36,100. It was down 0.6 of a point for the week. And the S&P 500 closed today at 4,682, and that was down 0.3 of a point for the week. And finally, the NASDAQ. They finished the week at 15,860, and that was down almost 0.7 of a point for the week. Cantor Fitzgerald, after announcing the split of today of Johnson & Johnson, put the stock, J&J, as a buy with a new price target at $215 a share. Well, this week, the Communist Party's Central Committee in Beijing elevated Xi Jinping's official status, ensuring him of longevity for his agenda and protecting him against criticism from inside the Chinese Communist Party. My guest this evening has consulted for the Defense Department and many Fortune 500 companies, and due to his expertise on China's goal of dominance. Plus, he's written a great book on the subject called China's Vision of Victory. Recently, China launched a super hypersonic missile that circled the globe twice before landing. Well, my guest this evening is Jonathan Ward, and he's here with us tonight. Hi, Jonathan. Welcome to Wall Street Wrap-Up.
Hi, Andre. Good to be with you.
Oh, thank you for coming. Jonathan, there may be viewers that personally remember this, but many of us read in history books. Now, October 1957, Russia launched the first satellite called Sputnik. And to say that it put shivers through U.S. intelligence agencies and defense departments is an understatement, because we went from going in space to now learning more about outer space. With the launch of this super hypersonic missile of China, is this our Sputnik moment?
Hi, Andre. I think you could think of it that way. I mean, it certainly changes some dynamics a bit, and most importantly, it shows us how advanced the Chinese military has become. And I think it reminds us that very much in the center of this competition with China are great and real military dangers. And I think that's often sort of seen as the less important theater. I mean, many people talk about the economic competition, including myself. I still think that's incredibly important. But you watch how rapidly they're gaining ground on key strategic systems. And I think the importance of this particular test, the hypersonic, is that it shows us that as China has all of these conventional territorial disputes and has built a massive conventional army, the world's largest navy now, the largest air force in Asia, the largest missile force, and all of this can range U.S. bases in the Pacific. They consider their nuclear capability to be basically a backstop and a defensive capability, and yet they have an offensive posture in the Pacific.
Would it be correct to say that we are in a Cold War right now with China?
I think it's begun, and I say that as a Cold War historian. I mean, my doctorate is in the Cold War history of China and India. So to me, yes, this is quite reminiscent, I think, of the early Cold War. I think there's a very dangerous period after the Second World War, right up through the Cuban Missile Crisis, when the world's geopolitics had not yet sorted out. We were pre-détente. We hadn't found a coexistence with the USSR.
You brought up a little bit about being a superpower of Navy. I know they've already got, I think, one aircraft carrier. They're building one or two more aircraft carriers. Are countries such as the Philippine Islands, Japan, and other countries in that area, should they be concerned?
Oh, I think everybody is already quite concerned. I mean, every single capital in Asia is well aware of this problem. I mean, certainly in Japan, certainly in the Philippines, China's territorial disputes with Japan, with every Southeast Asian nation, with India. We sit sort of at the edges of this as with treaty alliances with Japan and other countries in the region. So I think every capital, every country in Asia is aware of the potential for Chinese military aggression here.
How nervous should the Taiwanese people be at this moment?
Well, I think Taiwan's leaders are doing some interesting things here. I mean, they've been very successful in their outreach to the world's democracies. I mean, they have something called a southbound strategy, which is about building ties with Australia, with India, with Japan, with other democracies in the region. And of course, the U.S. Defense Department at this point is quite focused on Taiwan and preventing, ideally, China from being able to seize the island. But they're very much in the crosshairs here. And Xi Jinping said just very recently in a speech, he says, the Chinese nation has a glorious tradition of opposing division and maintaining unity. The Taiwan independence split is the biggest obstacle to the reunification of the motherland and a serious hidden danger to national rejuvenation. The Taiwan issue is purely China's internal affair and no external interference is allowed. No one should underestimate the Chinese people's determination and strong ability to defend national sovereignty and territorial integrity. I mean, this is a very recent speech. So the Communist Party is making it absolutely clear how they view the island and their desire to retake it. I think at this point, after the takeover of Hong Kong, the idea that there's going to be a peaceful reunification and that there's somehow Taiwan will acquiesce to Beijing's overtures, I think that's sort of in the past. So now it really comes down to the question of will they use force? So this brings the entire alliance system, the entire sort of Asia-Pacific, all the democracies into this picture now. I mean, you just had Australia's foreign minister say, I believe today, that Australia will follow the U.S. lead if there's a conflict in Taiwan, and of course Japan is now concerned. It's a very, very consequential piece of the picture.
Jonathan, I've read the agreement that the United States has with Taiwan, and it does not specifically say that the United States will defend Taiwan, but it does say that, and I'm just going from memory right now, but it does say that it will support its efforts, such as furnishing military or other things, but it specifically does not say that we will defend. There's a lot of Taiwanese people that I would assume are misinterpreting that. Do they feel that the United States will definitely come? Because as we both know, when it comes to leaderships, there are some leaders that will take a bold stand, and then there are some leaders that just won't take a bold stand. What are your thoughts?
Well, that's right. I mean, the commitments to Taiwan are essentially to help and assist with Taiwan's ability to arm itself and ability to defend itself. And the policy is, essentially referred to as strategic ambiguity. Part of the point there was as we normalized relations with communist China during the Cold War, and then that relationship continued on an engagement track, the idea was really that neither side would change the status quo. But the world has changed, I think, several times since our opening to China, since our essentially trading of the Beijing is our counterpart there. Because remember, I mean, in the early Cold War, Taiwan was, we were stationing troops there. I mean, we had a real defense treaty with them, and that was a very different world. China has built, a force that is, far, more powerful than the one that we've had to deal with in the past in the context of these agreements. Mm-hmm. And, also that Taiwan is an incredibly important piece of the Asia-Pacific picture. I mean, if China were to seize that island, it changes the military geography of Asia for the rest of the century.
I'm curious, Jonathan, when it comes to the way the United States pulled out of Afghanistan, China and their propaganda arm with the CCP used that to their full advantage to Taiwan, basically saying, don't count on the United States always being there. And I'm wondering your thoughts on if Taiwan is really taking a full seriousness to the circumstances of what's going on. And this caught my eye when I read this a while back, and I wonder if you could expound on it. Like in Taiwan, the national defense, there was a mandatory 2 years for men, Taiwanese men, to be in the military. Right. Now, it's only 4 months. So I'm curious, I could have understand if it was 4 months and now it's 2 years, but it's gone opposite. Do you think that they're not building up their defenses, but actually maybe going on the opposite way?
It's an island that has a tradition of being on the front lines of the Cold War itself. So that, prior generation, and it was a dictatorship back then. So I think there's a certain tension that has existed, as people point out, in the nature of military service. But I think, again, the world has changed quite a great deal. They are on the front lines of an incredibly consequential sort of meeting point of modern superpower confrontation. As a friend of mine in U.S. government once said, Taiwan is the Berlin of the new Cold War. And I think that's, there's a lot to that. And hopefully it remains a place like Berlin in the Cold War where neither side really presses its advantage too far and it remains a frozen conflict. But either way, I mean, Beijing has made clear what it wants to do. And I think on the U.S. side, I think people are increasingly more open about how important this place is. I mean, you saw President Biden in a town hall just this week, or perhaps last week, saying that when asked, would the U.S. come to Taiwan's defense, and he very plainly said, yes, we would. Mm-hmm. So I think we can all see how important this piece of the map really is.
You've been to Taiwan, and talked to the Taiwanese people, but just a little bit of a backstory is that Chiang Kai-shek in China went to Taiwan when Mao Zedong overtook Chiang Kai-shek's forces and he militarized Taiwan. So I imagine, from what I understand, the people there were anti-military, because they lived under a militaristic rule for so long, not so much now. So that they're not very wanting to have a strong military. Is that the back-thinking of a lot of Taiwanese people?
I've heard that said. I've seen it referenced. I mean, I think there is, obviously Taiwan is one of the great sort of stories of a flourishing democracy in Asia, and that's part of why it's important. I mean, there's the military geography, there's the advanced semiconductors capability, there's the fact that it's a democracy. It's an example of, many people who might say, oh, look, China is not ready to liberalize or it won't do any of that. I mean, we have this example of a flourishing, rather beautiful democracy sitting right across the strait, which I think, does have great importance, for our values and for the alliance system as well.
When it comes to Xi Jinping, he is the General Secretary of the Communist Party, the leader of the Communist Party. I have heard where he is basically dictator for life, but I've also understood that he is renominated for, I've heard, 10-year terms. How powerful or well-positioned is his position as leader of the Chinese people?
Well, I would say that, look, on any given day, I mean, if you're the general secretary of the Communist Party of China, I mean, you could face a whole lot of disruptive internal opposition. I mean, that's certainly, there are factions. There's the potential for anything to go wrong in a dictatorship like that. And yet what he's done that I think is important is, in addition to his position as party secretary and head of state, and those really matter, he's really asserted himself in the Central Military Commission, so having that kind of influence over the Chinese military as a whole. But he is now in command of the most powerful military that China has ever had in its entire history, and I think that's something where he's sort of finding, I'd say, a new horizon here in China's ambitions, and yet he's also fulfilling the ambitions of the past.
I see. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Dr. Jonathan Ward. He's written a great book called China's Vision of Victory. We're talking about China as a superpower. We're going to take a break. We'll be right back. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Dr. Jonathan Ward. We're very happy to have him. He is the author of a book, China's Vision of Victory, and we're talking about the rise of China. And I would imagine most politicians in the United States thought that with capitalism being shown to China, this would open them up to more of a capitalistic type of a environment, that they would lessen communism and embrace capitalism. In your studies, has this actually happened?
Well, I think there's no question that they've moved beyond the sort of Maoist type economy and into something that obviously created what many called the economic miracle. But that was really through engagement with the U.S., through system reform of their own system, and they've sort of flourished in every strategic industry and emerging technology that matters. And they've got the world's second largest market. I mean, we all know this. So what kind of thing it is, I think at this point doesn't really matter. What matters is that it's a hostile adversary state, and we're going to be dealing with that, and far more dangerous, I think, to deal with a state that has the intentions that the Communist Party clearly has, and they've made absolutely clear what those are, when it has that kind of economic heft behind it. A lot of it was about the potential for the country to liberalize, to democratize, to become a responsible stakeholder in the international system. And I think that was a genuinely held belief. It was a rather noble aspiration, but it was a grand mistake, a profound mistake, to basically bring an unreconstructed dictatorship into the world's economy.
I'm curious your thoughts if whether or not China took capitalism and basically turned it against us. In this aspect, you have many of our U.S. companies that have factories in China. The NBA sees China as a huge market. Movies, motion pictures, view China's market as probably the second largest after the United States, if not even more so, with 1 billion people. And because China's willingness to want censorship, they have muzzled a lot of U.S. companies, movies, the NBA, if you dare to speak up, if you even mention the word Taiwan. Has China been adept at turning it against U.S. companies, which in turn would also harm U.S., the United States?
I think they have been adept, and this is a very, very, I can't stress this enough. I mean, this is probably the most important conversation that America can have, is what are our companies doing in our primary adversary? What are they doing there? I think we need to have this conversation as a country, and we need to have it now, because at the end of the day, they didn't make all this progress on their own. They made this progress through engagement with us, through access to our market, through access to our technology, through access to our capital. We are continuing to do that, even as Washington sounds the alarm. It's not just me that's saying this at this point. I mean, I might have been, a contributor to some of the awareness that's out there now, but it's really our national government, our national security, those of all of our allies around the world all get what this means. And yet our companies are still there, still building into China, still doing FDI, still expanding factories, still chasing after the billion-person market. And our investment sort of leaders are also there. And that's even worse, because at the end of the day, a corporate executive can perform a risk assessment and say, hey, do I really want to have a supply chain in a country that's talking about war with all of its neighbors? And also talking about war with the United States. I mean, you can do that risk assessment and make a decision on it. But if you are an investment bank and you're basically, your business model is to, directly sort of, build a business around China's own growth, to manage their money, to assist their sort of mergers and acquisitions and the efficiencies within their economy. That's the direct benefit to China. So, I mean, we have to have this conversation now, and I think our companies need to pull back from China. I really do. I mean, you add up where this is all headed, for their own sake and for the sake of our country. The companies really have to start pulling back. And I think we need to be sure that we are not helping our adversary in the way that we currently are.
Yeah, Jonathan, I'm curious too of your thoughts of whether we're holding more of a better hand than we realize, because China and Xi Jinping has a problem. They've got over 1 billion people that they've got to keep working, and if they don't keep these people working in the outside of the city, the large city areas, those people are going to come to the larger cities, Beijing, Shanghai, and such, looking for work. So that's why they're making deals. I'm talking about the CCP and Xi Jinping. They're making deals with these major companies, Apple, Nike, and such, to build factories outside of the larger areas to keep these people at work. If they decide to pull out, then there's going to be over 1 billion people that are going to be looking for food to be able to, and they're going to be looking toward the government as they've been born and raised to do, with the thought and the ideas of communism.
On one hand, they're trying to move their industrial base westward as price of labor and all that goes up. So it's a natural transition. I mean, this isn't the low-cost economy that it was in the 90s, 2000s, et cetera, but it is a large market with a lot of efficiencies because the world went and built an industrial base there. So the party, I think, first of all, they're trying to indigenize across every single industry that matters. So at the end of the day, multinationals as employers in China is a good question, but I don't think that's really why the party is doing this. What they really want is access to technology, access to capital, access to economic efficiencies. And I think the real issues that they're facing, I mean, yes, there's demographics, there's debt, and there's also the potential for unrest. I mean, if pieces of the economy start to falter. So, but a lot of that kicks in the next decade, in the 2030s. I mean, that's when the demographics really set in, for example.
True.
So we're going to need to deal with them as a very capable adversary now, and not just wait for those to sort of those threats and sort of problems to manifest.
Jonathan, I've got time for about one more question. I've got a lot more questions, and I hope you come back. But I'm curious, if you were, thank you, if you were advising our State Department and our administration when it comes to China, how should we position ourselves and deal with China for the next 5, 10, and 15 years forward?
I think what really matters here is not how we deal with China. I mean, we've tried a lot. I mean, we rolled out the economic red carpet to them and did all sorts of things. What matters here now is looking after ourselves. And what I said in Vision of Victory, there are really 3 things you have to do to win a long-term contest with China. The United States has to remain the world's largest economy. So we have to get started on that. And that's going to require our business leaders to be engaged with this problem. You can't do that without America's CEOs and finance leaders, but they have to understand, what's happening here in the U.S.-China relationship. 2, you have to unite the world's democracies. And I think the Biden administration has really made an effort to do that through its diplomacy. There's a long way to go, but they understand that concept. And 3rd, you have to maintain military deterrence over not just China, but Russia. I mean, they're working together in a lot of this. There's a kind of anti-Western, anti-American sort of entente that's coming together. So remain the world's largest economy, unite the democracies, and maintain deterrence. You do those 3 things for long enough, and you add to that an enormous amount of American innovation. And I think we can change the game here, but it's going to be very difficult. And right now, I think our biggest problem is that our country as a whole is not yet seeing this. It's the disconnect between the business sector and national security that I think is so dangerous. You get those things done, and that's very hard, but you get them done. And I think we are back on the right track. If you don't get them done, then we're headed for something, I think, quite dangerous.
Much worse. The book is called China's Vision of Victory by Dr. Jonathan Ward. Jonathan, I hope you come back. Had a great time with you.
Definitely. Thank you, Andre.
Thanks so much, Jonathan. We appreciate it. Well, when we opened the show we talked about inflation and how it erodes our purchasing power. A new study out by Jefferies indicates that stocks have outperformed inflation 90% of the time when inflation is below 3% and rising. Now, the problem is inflation reduces your purchasing power with cash flows. Sectors that usually do well in high inflation periods are companies in the sector of the oil industry, energy, because, well, oil companies, for example, can raise the price of a gallon of gas at the pumps, as we all know if you've ever tried to fill up your tank recently. And REITs, real estate, also does well because they can many times raise rents, that is, of course, unless leases are in place, and then you're not able to raise those rents. Now, those that do not do as well are technology and banks, because the cash that banks take in from previously made loans are locked in with monthly loan payments. So if you've got a question about finance, we'd love to hear from you. You can always write us at andre@wallstreetwrapup.info. Keep it pithy or concise, and we'll be glad to answer your questions. And now for a look ahead for next week. But first, well, true or false? Men and women competing at the U.S. Open tennis tournament use different or same balls. We'll have the answer in just a moment. True or false? Men and women competing in the U.S. Open tennis tournaments use the same balls. Well, that's false. Men use fuzzier, extra-duty balls, where women use sleeker, smoother balls. Next time you're at a cocktail party, use that. You'll be the hit. Now, we've got some great guests coming up in the next few weeks, and we want you there. We'll be talking with the former Federal Reserve Governor and Vice Chairman of the Federal Reserve, Tom Honig, about the Federal Reserve and interest rates. And also coming up in a couple of weeks, we'll be talking with the former NATO commander of all Afghan forces, General David Petraeus. General Petraeus was also the former director of the CIA. And as you can tell, there's lots to discuss with General Petraeus. Well, next week, we're going to be talking with Gerald Storch. Now, Jerry's the former CEO and chairman of the board of Toys R Us and HBC. HBC is the parent of Saks Fifth Avenue and Hudson Bay Company. Jerry was also the vice chairman of Target. Well, Christmas is just around the corner, and, well, retail problems and empty shelves, supply disruptions. Are the malls going to be dying due to online shopping? Now, as CEO and chairman of Storch Advisors, now Jerry can advise us on the retail business this holiday season. And Jerry is going to be with us next week on Wall Street Wrap Up. And as a reminder, we repeat the show on Sunday mornings, but the best way is to set your DVR so you'll never miss an episode. And that's our show for Friday, November the 12th, 2021. Hope you've enjoyed it. Thank you for Jonathan Ward joining us this evening. But as always, we appreciate you for allowing us into your homes tonight. Remember, you can always follow us on social media, Facebook, whatever they may call it these days, YouTube, Twitter, and WYES.org. So I hope you have a fun weekend and a productive week ahead. I'll see you next week. For Wall Street Wrap Up, I'm Andre Laborde. And remember, money never sleeps. Good night.
Sponsored by New Orleans Distillers, creators of fine spirits and liqueurs. Through dedication to science, art, and passion, blends of tradition and flavor emerge. For you, always locally crafted. New Orleans Distillers, classically Southern.